cold wind whistled through the deserted train station as I checked my watch again, 11:47 p.m. I hadn't planned on taking such a late train, but my meeting in the city ran longer than expected. The fluorescent light above me flickered erratically, creating dancing shadows on the empty platform. Only two other passengers waited nearby, both keeping to themselves. The train arrived with a screech, its worn-down exterior reflecting years of service on this rural line. I boarded the second-to-last car, choosing a window seat facing backward. The leather upholstery was cracked and faded, but I settled in for the 2-hour journey home. As the train lurched forward, I noticed one of the waiting passengers hadn't boarded. Strange. The rhythmic clacking of wheels against rails usually lulled me to sleep, but tonight something felt off. Rain started pelting the windows, creating rivulets that distorted the darkness outside. The gentleman who had boarded with me sat several rows ahead, his silhouette barely visible in the dim lighting. We passed through dense forest areas, the branches reaching toward the train like skeletal fingers. 40 minutes into the journey, we stopped at a small station I'd never noticed before. The platform was barely visible through the rain, illuminated by a single yellow lamp. No one got on or off, yet we remained stationary for several minutes. I pulled out my phone to check the route map, but there was no signal. The gentleman ahead shifted in his seat, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like dark stains on his jacket. My bladder urged me to find the restroom. Walking through the swaying car, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. No mechanical hum, no air conditioning, just the sound of wheels on rails. The connecting door to the next car was locked, which seemed unusual. Looking through its small window, I saw only darkness. The train's layout suddenly felt unfamiliar, though I'd taken this route dozens of times. Returning to my seat, I pulled out my laptop, hoping to get some work done. Instead, I found myself Googling recent news about this train line. My blood ran cold. 3 months ago, a passenger had disappeared during a late-night journey. The article mentioned other disappearances spanning the past decade, all on this route, all during late-night trains. The victims were solo travelers, just like me. The train suddenly decelerated. Through the window, I saw no station, no civilization, just dense woods. The gentleman stood up, and I noticed he wore a railroad employee's jacket, old and worn. He walked toward the rear of the car, passing my seat without acknowledging me. The back door opened with a hiss, and he disappeared into the darkness of the next car. My heart pounding, I decided to use the bathroom again, this time to hide and think. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered as I locked the door. The mirror was cracked, and rust stains colored the sink reddish-brown. I pulled out my phone again, still no signal. Looking at the time, I realized something impossible. It was still 11:47 p.m. Panic rising, I checked every clock I could find on the train. They all showed 11:47. Even my laptop displayed the same time. I remembered reading about the last known victim. They had caught some footage of her on a platform security camera. The timestamp had been 11:47 p.m. My hands trembled as I reached for the bathroom door handle. A screech of metal made me freeze. Through the tiny bathroom window, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. We were passing the wreckage of an old train, nearly hidden by vegetation. It was our train, the same model, the same colors, but decades older. As we passed, I counted the wreckage of 5 identical trains, each in various states of decay. I knew I had to act. The emergency brake handle glowed red in the darkness. According to the news articles, they never found any of the missing passengers. But they never found any bodies either. My trembling hand reached for the brake as footsteps approached the bathroom door. The handle felt ice cold beneath my fingers. The screech of the emergency brake pierced the night. Metal groaned as the train shuddered violently. I braced myself against the walls, praying. When we finally stopped, the silence was deafening. The bathroom door handle began to turn slowly, but the lock held. Through the window, I saw a sign emerging from the fog. Warning, track terminated, 1963 industrial accident site. I kicked out the small window and squeezed through it, dropping onto the gravel beside the tracks. My phone fell, its screen shattering on impact, frozen at 11:47 p.m. The train stood silent, no lights, no movement. The gentleman's silhouette appeared in a window, but it was wrong, distorted, impossibly tall. I ran. They found me the next morning, walking along the tracks, halfway to the next station. The train was gone, leaving no evidence of its passage. But the security footage from my departure station showed something chilling. At 11:48 p.m., 1 minute after I boarded, the train I was supposed to take arrived at the platform. I had stepped onto a different train, one that wasn't supposed to exist. I later discovered that in 1963, a series of trains disappeared on that line, along with their passengers. The railway company collapsed after that, and the line was abandoned. But somehow, on some nights, at precisely 11:47 p.m., a train still runs. The gentleman in the railroad jacket, he matched the description of the conductor from the last train that vanished in '63. I don't take late trains anymore. Sometimes I drive past that station late at night. Through the fog and rain, I occasionally see people waiting on the platform. I want to warn them, but by the time I turn around, both they and the platform are gone. Only a rusted sign remains, barely readable. Next train departing, 11:47 p.m. I should have questioned why security was so tight for a regular commuter train. The newly installed metal detectors and baggage scanners seemed excessive, but the news had reported increased theft on this route. 3 months of people's belongings vanishing during their journey. Laptops, phones, jewelry, all disappearing without a trace. No suspects caught, no evidence left behind. The train looked different from the usual ones, newer, more sophisticated. Its polished exterior reflected the setting sun like black glass. The electronic display showed my destination, a 3-hour journey to the coastal city where my sister lived. A handful of passengers boarded with me, all of us passing through security with our specially marked tickets. Everything about this car screamed luxury: leather seats, ambient lighting, touchscreen entertainment systems. I found my assigned seat, 23F, in a nearly empty car. The screen in front of me flashed an error message: system reset, maintenance mode active. I tried the call button, but nothing happened. The train pulled away from the station exactly on schedule. We passed through the industrial district as rain began falling. Through the streaked window, I watched factories give way to warehouses. My phone had full signal, unusual for this route. I texted my sister, "On the new express train. Fancy but weird. Almost empty." Her reply came quickly. "What new express train? They canceled all evening services this week." The ceiling-mounted surveillance camera caught my attention. Its recording light was off, covered in dust and cobwebs. How was that possible on a new train? I opened my news app and searched recent train-related stories. My chest tightened. The theft reports weren't about stolen belongings. They were about missing luggage cars, entire sections of trains disappearing between stations. I needed to check my suitcase. The luggage car was 2 cars ahead, through a series of automatic doors. Each swished open at my approach, revealing empty cars. The luggage compartment itself was dimly lit by a single emergency light. Suitcases lay scattered about, some open, contents spilling out. None were from our train. These bags were old, covered in dust. Returning to my car, I noticed the route display was glitching, showing impossible station names and error codes. I pulled up the train company's website. The new express service didn't exist. There was no 7:30 p.m. train on this route. According to the official schedule, I was sitting on a ghost train. The door to the driver's cabin was unlocked. Inside, exposed wires hung from panels, and every warning light blazed red. The control console was thick with rust. This wasn't a new train, it was an old one made to look new. A newspaper clipping was taped to the window. Railway engineer found dead after exposing corporate conspiracy. A restricted access door stood ajar in the narrow corridor behind the driver's cabin. The maintenance log hanging beside it was dated 3 years ago. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls. One drawer was labeled Project Echo, Transport Manifests. The documents inside detailed something horrifying: organized theft on a massive scale. The papers revealed a scheme involving modified trains. Shell companies would acquire decommissioned cars, retrofit them to look new, and run unauthorized services. They used them to steal entire luggage cars, swapping them at maintenance points while passengers were distracted. But recent documents suggested something worse. They weren't just stealing luggage anymore. A GPS tracker lay among the papers, its screen showing multiple red dots converging at an abandoned rail yard. The map showed our train moving along a route that officially didn't exist. We were headed straight for those dots. The engineer's death hadn't been an accident. He'd discovered where everything was going. The maintenance board listed hundreds of modified trains. Each one made a single journey before disappearing, supposedly scrapped. But the GPS coordinates showed they were all being collected somewhere. The engineer had written a final note. They're building something out there. The missing pieces, the stolen cars, it's all connecting to something bigger. I found the emergency brake system behind a panel. Old-fashioned, mechanical, with heavy chains. The emergency instructions were torn, but I understood enough. Pulling those chains would trigger the brakes in every car. I heard movement in the corridor outside. Someone was coming to check the restricted area. Through the window I saw we were approaching a vast rail yard. Hundreds of modified trains sat in neat rows, stripped for parts. They were building a fleet, creating ghost trains for something huge. The engineer had died trying to expose this. Now I knew too much. The footsteps grew closer. I broke the seal on the emergency exit. The door opened with a hiss, cold air rushing in. The train was slowing, approaching the yard's entrance. I had seconds to decide. Behind me, the restricted area door began to open. I clutched the documents, took a deep breath, and jumped. The police found me unconscious beside the tracks. The evidence I'd grabbed proved a massive criminal network was using ghost trains to steal billions in goods. But that was just the surface. The GPS coordinates led them to something worse, a massive underground facility where the trains were being modified for human trafficking. The rail yard was empty when authorities raided it, but they found the engineer's full report. Criminal organizations had infiltrated the rail system, using modified trains to transport thousands of victims. The new security checkpoints weren't to protect passengers, they were scanning for potential targets. Every week, more evidence emerges. Shell companies dissolve, records vanish, and witnesses disappear. But late at night, if you know where to look, you can still see them. Trains that don't exist, running on routes that aren't real, collecting people who will never be seen again. The network is still out there, growing in the shadows of legitimate railways. And somewhere, they're building more trains. The Transalpine Express stood gleaming at the platform, its polished exterior reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Snow was already falling heavily, unusual for October, but perfect for my first luxury sleeper train experience. The 15-hour journey through the mountains promised to be unforgettable. I didn't know then how true that would be. The cabin steward handed me an old brass key, apologizing that the electronic key cards weren't working due to the weather. Room 13. Not exactly lucky, but I wasn't superstitious. The steward mentioned something odd. Due to maintenance, only 3 of the 6 sleeper cars were in service tonight. Perfect for those seeking privacy, he said with an unusual smile. My private cabin was like stepping into another era. Dark wood paneling, brass fixtures, and deep red velvet curtains. A small desk held a leather-bound guest book. Flipping through it, I noticed the last entry was from 3 months ago. Strange for such a popular service. The train lurched forward as I unpacked, beginning its ascent into the mountains. The dinner service was announced at 8 p.m. I stepped into the corridor, immediately noticing how quiet it was. The wallpaper, Baroque patterns in deep crimson, seemed to absorb all sound. Most cabin doors stood open, revealing empty rooms. The steward had mentioned they were fully booked. Where was everyone? The dining car was deserted except for 2 tables. A couple sat at one, completely engrossed in their phones. The other held a businessman focused on his laptop. The waiter appeared silently at my elbow, suggesting the chef's special. When I asked about the low turnout, he mentioned something about other guests preferring room service tonight. My soup arrived steaming, garnished with unfamiliar herbs. The couple had vanished while I was studying the menu, their table now spotless as if never used. The businessman remained, still typing. As I watched, he stood abruptly, closed his laptop, and walked out without a word. His wine glass remained full, a lipstick stain on its rim. He had no lipstick on. Returning to my cabin, I noticed scratches around the door handle, deep gouges in the metal, as if someone had desperately tried to get in, or out. The emergency instructions beside the door were faded to near illegibility, but I could make out something about sealed windows and emergency exits between cars. Sleep wouldn't come. I browsed local news on my tablet, signal fading in and out as we climbed higher. A pattern emerged in recent headlines. 12 people had vanished from this route in the past year. The last known photo of each showed them boarding this very train, but according to official records, they never boarded at all. The cabin phone caught my attention. Its cord had been cut. The emergency numbers list beside it yellowed with age. I pulled out my mobile. No signal now. Through the window, snow-covered peaks glowed under a full moon. We should have passed several towns by now, but I'd seen no lights for hours. A shower might calm my nerves. The bathroom was impeccably clean, except for rust stains in the sink. As I turned on the water, I noticed something in the steamed-up mirror, a warning light reflecting from somewhere. It was coming from behind an access panel I hadn't noticed before. The panel opened easily. Inside, stacked maintenance logs detailed equipment modifications. Recent entries described removing emergency brakes, sealing windows, disabling communication systems. Pages of passenger manifests followed. Names were highlighted in red, dates matching the disappearances. Tonight's manifest was on top, my name highlighted. Behind the logs, I found a locked cabinet. The key from a ring labeled medical opened it. Inside, surgical instruments lay in neat rows. Some were stained dark brown. A leather-bound notebook contained detailed medical information about previous passengers, organ types, blood groups, tissue compatibility. My blood type was already written in tonight's entry. I had to see what was in the kitchen car. The door was unlocked. Industrial equipment filled the space, including what looked like operating tables behind plastic curtains. Hooks hung from ceiling tracks, leading to a heavy steel door marked cold storage. The manifest made sense now. They weren't passenger lists. They were shopping lists. Through the kitchen windows, I saw we were approaching a track switch. The map in my cabin had shown a straight route, but we were turning onto an unmarked branch line. The main track continued toward the next station. We were being diverted somewhere else. The staff would be making their rounds soon. I had minutes to act. The emergency brake override had to be somewhere. I found it in a maintenance alcove, a manual wheel with heavy chains. It would need all my strength to turn. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, getting closer. A voice called out, "Room check!" The wheel finally moved with a grinding shriek. The train shuddered violently as the brakes engaged. Through the window, I saw we were crossing a mountain bridge. The sudden stop sent us sliding sideways. Metal screamed against metal. The last thing I remember is grabbing the brake wheel as the car tipped toward the cliff edge. They found me unconscious in the snow 2 days later. The wreck was a twisted mass of metal at the bottom of the ravine. They claimed it was a regular passenger train that suffered brake failure. But search teams never found any other bodies, and the train company denied ever offering sleeper service on that route. The investigation continues. More vanished passengers have been discovered, spanning decades. But the strangest thing, recent satellite images show tracks in the snow, leading from the wreck site into an unmarked tunnel. Teams can't locate this tunnel on foot. On quiet nights, locals still hear a steam whistle echoing through the mountains. The Transalpine Express, they say, is still accepting passengers,